Great. Thank you, Julie. And welcome, everyone. I hope that everyone is staying warm right now. Corinne from Mauritius. I'm going to guess that Corinne may be the warmest of the folks in this call, given that I know that that folks in Israel got snow this week. So it's been a snowy Adar so far for folks, and quite cold. So keep warm by the fire of Torah. As some of you know, I like to use some visual aids to get us started. The inspiration for this this morning's class comes from this. It's not going to be super clear, but this is a single volume edition of what's called Mikraot Gedolot. There's not really a way to take a good photo of this as I've done in the past. So I'll just show you the volume. Some of you may have seen it. It's sort of Talmud style, the way that you have a central text up here, a single verse even sometimes, and then tons and tons of commentary that fills the rest of the page. Our learning this morning will focus on a single verse and then centuries of commentary, not all the commentary by any means, on this one verse, the namesake verse for our Torah portion this morning. But to get you started, if you want to respond in the chat, is if any of you are familiar with the phrase culture of giving, or not familiar with that phrase, I'd love to get your reactions when you hear that phrase. Please respond in the chat. What resonates with you when you hear the phrase culture of giving? And we'll take a minute or two to get your responses in the chat. Tzedakah, great, Jay. Yes. That is definitely one way that that this week's Torah portion is interpreted in our rabbinic tradition. Sharing your good fortune with others, Peter says, actions are more important than words. Interesting. Jen, thank you. Caring for orphan, widow, and poor. Catherine is anticipating what one of our commentators will address this morning. Taking care of others. Thank you, Yvonne. Willingness to share. Alan, yep. When helping others becomes part of your lifestyle, right? So how the culture of a community becomes part of one's own individual lifestyle, way of life. Listening, Jody says. And if any of you are able to join me in a future class, in my new position, I'm hoping to be able to be a little more interactive than we can be in this platform. So I hope to be able to demonstrate some of the listening that I can't do other than through the chat box, as part of a culture of giving in that role. I missed the name of the source. Okay, it's called Mikraot Gedolot. Corners of the fields, right? So that's an excellent example of the way that we have a culture of giving in the already in the Bible. And from Leviticus, the Leket and Shichicha are two different mitzvot. Agricultural mitzvot about tending to the needs of the poor by allowing them to collect during harvest times. From a new way of living, that is definitely an issue here, given where we are context-wise in Exodus. We're still dealing with folks who are recently freed slaves. So this is a new way of living for these folks. These are folks who would have been just trying to survive. Now they're being commanded to be thinking not just about day-to-day how to get by, but how to be thinking about the needs of everyone in their community, regardless of affluence and good fortune. Julie just put a transliteration of the title of this work. There are many different editions of it. If you do look for this online, or look to, if you want to build your Jewish bookshelf, you will find that it is widely available, but what you will find in these editions of Mikraot Gedolot varies widely. And two of the sources sometimes appear that we're going to be seeing today, but do not actually appear in the edition that I just showed you on my camera. So let's now turn to the sources. Thank you for, and lastly, Jennifer says, put yourself in the shoes of your donors. Remember, they are your constituents too. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to now share my screen, and we'll jump in. So we have here Terumah, the not just the name of our parsha, but what does this?
Andy, we're seeing the wrong document.
We're seeing not. Thank you for saying that. Let's see. Stop share. Sorry. Share screen. You want. My bad. How's that, Julie?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Great. All right. What we are going to be exploring today is, in the eyes of several centuries of commentators, not just what does Terumah mean, but what do we learn, what do we need to explore through a close reading of this verse, Exodus 25:2. So I'll read it for everyone, and I'm going to read it in Hebrew and then in English so that we can identify what might be, and if we were doing this, again, with a little more time and voice interactivity, we might be able to tease this out. I'm going to tell you what the commentators are going to pick up on. Daber el bnei Yisrael vayikhu li teruma me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo tikhu et terumati. Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves him. And pardon the gendered language here. It is a reflection of the Hebrew, the gendered Hebrew. But let's focus on terms and phrases. A close reading of this text would ask questions of, what does it mean? Why does it maybe use the verb kach, take, or which is translated here accept? That's not actually, that's the best way to translate this, but it requires a semantic range here. So vayikhu li, take for me. Why li? You'll see that Rashi addresses that right away, and Rashi addresses that because Rashi is editing, is drawing upon an entire millennium of rabbinic tradition at that point, when he writes in the 11th century from France. Terumah, what does the phrase terumah mean? It means a lot of things, actually. Me'et kol ish, from every person. So does it really mean every person? Does it only mean, in this gendered sense, just the men? Or does it mean women? Does it mean children? Does it mean people of widely varying levels of fortune or misfortune? Like in our tradition, we even ask for tzedakah from those who are themselves asking for tzedakah. That is one of the quirks of rabbinic tradition. Asher yidvenu libo, every person whose heart so moves him, them. What does it mean for one's heart to move one? Tikhu et terumati, that's you shall accept gifts. So what's the difference between bringing gifts and accepting gifts? Those are some of the questions that the centuries of commentators you'd find in Mikra Okadolot would be addressing. We're going to look at just four people who, four men. They are men in this shiur, but for diversity's sake, we're going to be looking at European and non-European commentators. Okay, so Rashi from the 11th century in France very laconically starts us off. Vayikhu li teruma li shmi. This is, as the translation shows, an incredibly laconic distillation in one word of what an entire midrash, an entire rabbinic commentary from late antiquity has to say in Midrash Tanchuma: bring me gifts to me. to me, God, to glorify my name. Rather than, as many people might think in terms of culture of giving, there's a lot of dysfunction out there in terms of philanthropy. How many people have experienced philanthropy where it's really about somebody's ego? There's always going to be some ego involved, but what Rashi is saying here right out of the gate, this isn't about you. This is about God. And this is about you as a person made in the image of God. So your giving has to be done for a holy purpose. So let's go deeper into that holy purpose. Terumah, what is that? Hafrashah. Here, this is something else that Rashi does classically, not just drawing upon the rabbinic tradition and editing it, but very closely reading the early Aramaic translation of the Torah from Onkelos, who, by the way, was a convert, a Greek convert to Judaism. So as somebody who was already moving between cultures, didn't just attempt a translation into Greek like the Septuagint, but translated the Torah into Aramaic. And so Hafrashah is something set apart. So then Rashi continues, the meaning is this: let them set apart, yafrishu li mimamonam nidava, apart from their positions, a voluntary gift in my honor. So he doesn't explain what this means, a voluntary gift. We'll come back to this. This is to say, this is not a poll tax. This is not the same thing as we'll see with the as we did last week in last week's special Torah reading, the shekalim. This is not the machatzit shekel, the half shekel, which was levied against all the males in Israel, and you couldn't give more. But everyone had to give at least that much. This is to say there is a wide range of giving, but it has to come from a different kind of place. Yidvenu libo. What is this term, yidvenu libo? It is of the same root. Rashi continues, lishon nidava. And here's where, again, something else Rashi does. He acts like a grammarian and as a philologist, looking at how roots of verbs and words appear in the Torah. Here he says, of the same root as nidava. Okay, good. And here the nun in the latter is replaced by the dagesh. And the dagesh is a grammatical feature in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew in particular. And this denotes goodwill, a free will or goodwill offering. And now we get additional help from the Old French, apaisement. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I actually never studied French, so please pardon my impression of you French speakers out there. But he says it right. You can see Bila'az means lishon avodah zara. He did not think very highly of his neighbors, but that's just a general term from his time, that non-Hebrew speak is the language of avodah zara, of idolatry, but he did speak it. And we'll close out here with Rashi. We finally get to something a little bit more extended. So here is where Rashi now summarizes. He doesn't just quote from earlier sources. He's actually going to summarize an entire millennium of rabbinic commentary. Tikhu et terumati. Accept gifts from me. Our rabbi said there three kinds of teruma are used here. A, the heave offering, which consisted of a bikah, half a shekel, a head, and of which the sockets were made, as in Exodus 39, that is Parashat Pekudei, Ele Pekudei. Another, B, is the heave offering for the altar, a bikah, a head that was given to, quote unquote, the basket, the kupah of communal funds used to buy the communal sacrifices. Folks, any of you acquainted with modern Israeli life will know that insurance, health insurance in Israel is often referred to as a kupat cholim. So this is ways that we still see some of these concepts playing out in our Jewish life today. And C, the heave offering for the tabernacle, the Mishkan, which was a free will gift from each individual. This is from the Jerusalem Talmud, Shekalim 1:1. 13 different articles, now citing again the Tanhuma, the late antiquity Midrash collection, mentioned, 13 different articles mentioned in this section were all required either for the work of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, that is the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, or making the articles contained therein, or for the priest's garments, as you'll find when you look closely into the matter. So what he's saying here is, don't just take my word for it. I'm summarizing this now, even though Rashi didn't cite his own sources, because he was writing for an elite crowd who would have sort of picked up on some of his hints here. But he's saying, go look at the Jerusalem Talmud in Shekalim. Go look at the Tanchuma. Don't just take it from me. I'm helping you identify sources. So that's one of the things that Rashi does. We will come back to Rashi because one of the major features of Mikro Gedolot is what's called a super commentary. Before we get to commentaries upon commentaries, we get folks like Rabbeinu Bachia and Seforno from Spain and from Italy who read Rashi very closely and read those who are responding to Rashi in the centuries, a couple centuries afterwards, and then begin to write in novel ways. Rabbeinu Bachia ben Esher, is a Spanish rabbi of the 13th and 14th centuries, and he is famous for addressing what it becomes known as Pardes, not the yeshiva at which Julie and I studied in Jerusalem, but one of the reasons why that yeshiva took its name. Pardes means pshat, P, remez, R, drash, D, and sod. Pardes means a vineyard, or sorry, a garden or a vineyard, or as it's in a semantic, not a semantic range, cross-linguistically might sound like paradise, Pardes. It is taken as an abbreviation, an acrostic, not an acrostic, an abbreviation for those four different ways of reading. Pshat, a literal reading of a text. Remez, a sort of homiletical. Drash, an allegorical reading. And Sod, Kabbalistic, spiritual reading of the text. Rabbeinu Bachia will classically look at a single verse and try to offer four different ways, not just four different interpretations like Rashi had above, but four different lenses of sort of spiritual reading, addressing the literal, practical, allegorical, moral, and homiletical before getting to the mystical and Kabbalistic. Here, we'll see Rabbeinu Bachia address Vaikhu li Terumah me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo tikhu et terumati. He addresses the core of the verse as the Dibur HaMatchil, as they say, the opening phrase for this comment. The plain meaning starts with the pshat of this text is that these gifts were dedicated to God's name, right? So here he's drawing upon Rashi, but he's going to go in a slightly different direction. After this, Filishon Terumah Hafrasha, great, still in line with Rashi. Klomar, so and Terumah means something set aside. In other words, here's where he's now going to try to explain and subtly move in a different direction. In other words, the Israelites were to set aside a voluntary contribution for the building of the tabernacle, each out of his or her own funds. The whole concept of the tabernacle is an internalized version of what transpired during the revelation at Mount Sinai. This is now, he's quoting from Ramban, Nachmanides. And here's what's crucial, folks. In fancy terms, this is called anagogic reading. This is saying anything that one reads in the Torah or in a text is read not in a vertical relationship between us humans and the sort of the divine source or the divinity in this sacred text, but internally. So not a lot of folks talk about their challenges with God, the sky God, the sort of the Bible or Greek mythology of this idea that God is out there. No, this is saying not only is God in here, are we created in God's image, and that God is within us, around us and within us. This is saying this story is within you. Terumah is within you. The whole concept of the Mishkan is an internalized version of what transpired during the revelation at Mount Sinai. This is where Rabbeinu Bachya is quoting from Ramban, who is drawing upon later in this passage when it says, Ve'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. What does it mean? If you make me a mikdash, a holy place, I will dwell amidst you, within you. Literally, God will dwell within you. That Mishkan becomes part of your soul. So let's continue. The very attribute, kavod, glory, which rested on Mount Sinai for all to see afterwards, was manifest inside the Holy of Holies on the ark between the cherubs, the keruvim, on an ongoing basis. The principal difference was that it can no longer be seen. Something that can't be seen, that's like what we have to do with our inner life. We have to imagine what we are feeling emotionally or spiritually happening within us. This is mapping the pshat, the literal, into a moral allegory or a homiletical drashir, and also then beginning to get towards the mystical reading that Rabbeinu Bachya so privileges. The end. So we'll skip ahead in his commentary on this verse. Tikhu et terumati asher accept gifts from me. Since the Torah first mentions generosity of spirit, it now informs us that such a spirit results in the gift being described by God as my gift, as if it were God's own contribution. So we're closing the real estate here. There's no distance. There's no sky God. God is both around us and within us in this giving relationship, in this giving action. God feels close to people who are of generous heart, but hates people who are stingy by nature. Furthermore, gifts for me, quote unquote, is meant to teach that once the donation has been promised, it belongs to God. And a donor who does not pay it is liable to punishment. All right? Be careful out there, folks, what your promises you make. And a donor who does not pay it is liable to punishment as if one is stolen from God. Once the gift has left the domain of the donor, that person is no longer responsible for what happens to it. So that's also saying you should take a high level of responsibility for your commitments, but then know once you've fulfilled your commitments, it's really putting a lot of trust in the people to whom you are donating. They are now the stewards of that gift. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to treat Sforno as laconically as he writes here, not quite Rashi laconic, but now we're moving ahead to 15th century Italy. Sforno spent his entire life in Italy and writes, Me'et kol ish, from every person, God commanded that they should not collect coercively, like a tax, as they did for the Public Charity Fund. They would instead raise donations only from volunteers. Sforno knows Rashi, has seen that Rashi addresses this in some fashion, but still feels the need to quote here. And what you can't see in the translation is some of the language that he uses here. And this is where Yigbu'u bizroa, the outstretched arm. I wanted to use this as we approach Pesach. Zroa is not just God's outstretched arm protecting, but Zroa was then used as euphemistically for coercion in terms of the way that Gaba'ai Tzedakah, our tzedakah collectors from the ancient world forward, would sometimes have to twist arms. So this is saying that however much tzedakah is important, the terumah would not have required arm twisting. This is totally voluntary. And I'm going to now add, I'm going to switch sources, folks, because I couldn't not draw more upon the non-Ashkenazic world, given my love of Or HaChaim. I just took a little extra time to edit the sources for you. Sorry. So switching documents here. Great. So this is Terumah, Insights into a Culture of Giving, or HaChaim. I think Julie has posted this additional source for you. Oh no, gosh, what is going on?
Oh, that's just Safaria.
Oh no, sorry. Oh, thank you for your patience, folks. This is.
If you click on that other tab up top on the Or HaChaim.
Yes.
Yeah, and then just close that window.
Right, here we go.
Oh. Yeah.
Good, okay. So moving forward. So we have Or HaChaim on this Me'et Kol Ish V'Gomer. This is to say, etc. From any man. Ulai, maybe, perhaps, the Torah means that if a certain individual was well known to be of a giving and generous nature, they would not assess him as to what could be expected of him, but they would accept without question whatever such an individual chose to contribute. By the way, I left unadapted here the language from any man, because elsewhere in this passage, this commentary, which I've just condensed here, Or HaChaim in the 17th century of Morocco and then and Italy is well aware of the gender issues here, and it addresses the question of whether Terumah is, despite the language Me'et Kol Ish, speaking to women's philanthropy. So bear that in mind, even though he uses the gendered language here. When such an individual, affluent individual, he described his contribution as terumati, this is my contribution, they would let it go at that. Now it continues. Here's where we get into, like the Rabbeinu Bachia, the deeper spiritual and moral questions here of philanthropy. A moral dimension of the verse may have to do with the attachment of the soul to God. Such a relationship may be reinforced by means of a tangible gift towards the construction of the tabernacle. The collective soul of Israel is termed terumah. Now we're going from this sort of anagogic reading this this idea of the giving relationship is internal, not vertical, but internal. It's just saying this entire passage is an allegory that Israel is being given unto God in order to become more deeply in relationship with God and maybe to uncover God within us. That the collective soul of Israel is termed terumah. This is based on Jeremiah 2, verse 3. Israel is holy unto God. Reshit tivuata, the first of his harvest. So connecting Reshit and tivuah, the word Reshit is often applied to terumah. Accordingly, acceptance of a tangible gift by the Jewish people achieves that God's presence will dwell in Israel. The words tikhu et terumati, they shall take gifts, refers to the Shekhinah. Now, again, making the connection in the biblical passage, in the passage within Parashat Terumah, between the details at the very outset of the Torah portion and later on, ve'asuli mikdash ve'shachanti b'tocham, that verse, ve'shachanti b'tocham, and I will dwell amidst you, shachanti, and Shekhinah, the divine presence, and the female divine presence at that, is later defined and understood in our later rabbinic tradition. The words tikhu et terumati refer to the Shekhinah, that female divine presence, which is called Terumat Hashem, the contribution of God, God's name. So we are already a couple minutes past noon. Where do I leave you? I had to skip over the more involved source that is a super commentary, but the Siftei Chachamim it becomes classic because here's the core thing for all of you here today. Siftei Chachamim says that more than any of the answers that these commentators have provided, is what is essential in our tradition is knowing good questions, how to ask good questions. For each of these men, and I would say all the more so in our generation where men and women equally have a place at the table of Torah learning and Torah teaching, is learning how to open our eyes and our ears to ask and hear good questions. When we do a close reading of the text, as these commentators do, in the last two millennia, we begin to learn how to read closely our Torah, and indeed just the opening verse of this Torah portion, and to begin to offer answers, insights into things that are core to who we are as Jews today, maybe who we've always been, but how we continue to evolve as a people and continue to evolve in relationship with other faith groups, faith traditions. In my line of work, what that means is advancing a culture of giving. What the Siftei Chachamim would do here in conversation about philanthropy and the spiritual dimensions of philanthropy that Orach Chaim and the Rabbeinu Bachia address in alongside Seforno and Rashi, is to say, where are we today in the midst of these major crises? All the more so facing not just climate change and not just global warming, but global weirding, that all of Texas is facing this horrible, horrible weather, and the human exacerbation of that with systemic breakdowns. Looking at the crises that are facing our nation and humanity in early 2021, where does our giving need to be? And not just our giving of resources, but giving of spirit. So that's a question, one question I would leave for you in sort of channeling Siftei Chachamim, trying to understand the question behind any of these answers. I'm happy to field some responses. I've not, in trying to work through the material, not looked at the chat box, but I'll stop stop the share and see if anyone wants to respond to the large amount of material I just threw at you before we peel away. And I'll wish any of you who have to leave right away a Shabbat Shalom and a happy Purim in advance. So Keith asks for the link for the second resource. I think Julie.
Yeah, I need to get that from you in an email, and then I'll upload it with the video. So if people want to check that out in the video recording, it'll be uploaded there.
So women brought gifts. The bronze laver was made from the mirrors they contributed. Yes, that is a thank you for that, Tanya. Sorry, folks, are doing that. Okay. Right. So this is also something that is Ronnie Leibovich writes here, that those students of the Kabbalistic, the mystical tradition, love to cite is Reshit Chochmah, that phrase. In an alternative interpretation for the word Reshit is wisdom. That is just one of the sources. Ani Reshit, Ani Chochmah, Ronnie. There are a number of other proof texts for that mystical understanding. And apparently I've left this crowd uncharacteristically speechless. I'm not getting anything but Shabbat Shalom. So maybe I answered all of your questions in the course of my teaching.
There were a few questions up earlier.
I see.
In the chat box.
I'll try to scroll a little bit. Julie, unless you want to channel them from your reading of the. Why is this particular offering in Exodus 25:2 voluntary? Excellent. That's one of the key questions here is what makes Terumah different from all the other offerings as we think of them later in Leviticus. Korbanot are those sacrifices are near bringing offerings. Korbanot from the root karov of near. So how does Terumah contrast with other kinds of offerings? That's a question behind so much of what we are dealing with today. Yes, and so why isn't Aaron involved here? Great question. So Terumah later is Michael Asher. The only priests can eat Terumah. Terumah becomes a term in rabbinic tradition for a more specific kind of offering that deals specifically with the temple, and not as it's used here as an offering towards the building of the Mishkan. But that's one of the reasons why Rashi has to address, where does Onkelos understand Terumah as something that is set aside. That's a key connection between the biblical Terumah and the rabbinic Terumah. Mishkan was built from reparations. Yeah, so a midrashic understanding Tanya draws upon the chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael, that the Israelites went up in Parshat Beshalach armed, as it were. What does chamushim mean? Does it mean armed? Is it that they had provisions? And one interpretation is that they were taking reparations, that they had taken gold and silver, all these different things. They didn't these are freed slaves. Well, they actually left Egypt with gifts from their former captors, enslaved the folks who enslaved them, and that included somehow dolphin skins, by the way. So they then took the reparations and they turned the reparations into building materials. They could have kept the wealth, but as Tanya says, but no, they decided to use it to build their holy nation's center point, the focus of their traveling camp, the Mishkan. Instead of enriching themselves, they're enriching their community. Okay, so we're 10 past the hour. I'm just going to say, I'm going to put myself, as Jennifer Badani says, put yourself in the shoes of your donors. I'm going to put myself in the shoes of you, the learners, and say, thank you for your time. And now go and learn further. If that means finding a resource like Sefaria online. As many of you know, there's a great relationship between Sefaria.com, Sefaria, and myjewishlearning.com. That is one way that you can explore the sources that I prepared today. If you want to go online and buy yourself a copy of Mikro Gedolot, you can do some research into the volumes available. But Zil Gemor, as they say in the Talmud, go and study. This is all commentary. Now just go learn it. And thank you for your time. Shabbat Shalom. And I look forward, please God, to the opportunity of learning with you, all of you again sometime soon.